Hi, this is consumer protection attorney Bill Clanton. I've got the pleasure of having a credit reporting expert here on today's video. This is Doug Hollon, and he's worked for years inside the credit reporting industry. And we've got him on the channel today to answer questions and talk about what goes on inside the credit bureaus. Doug, can you take a minute to introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks, Bill. Good morning. Yeah, of course, my name's Doug Hollon. I have worked in the credit reporting industry for over 15 years now. Prior to that, I had a military career. So for all the veterans out there, I appreciate you. But yeah, I worked in the industry. I've worked for a national CRA for a little over 14 years. And during that time, I was, involved in the dispute process, involved in the inner workings of what happens during that process. And then now that I've left that company, I've decided to help consumers and and others. So that's why I'm here.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service, Doug. And we're glad to have you on the show and have somebody who's actually got some inside knowledge of what goes on at the bureaus. We spoke a little before we got online here, and I think one of the things that you could help consumers understand is the dispute process. How does that work out? When should somebody dispute something, and what can they expect when they file a dispute?
Well, anytime they see anything inaccurate on their credit report, they need to bring that to the attention of the respective credit reporting agency and the data furnisher. I would do both. They can do that. And when I say data furnisher, that's also a term for creditor. So a data furnisher is and the reason I say data furnisher as opposed to creditor is because a collection agency is not a creditor. A collection agency doesn't. So that's an example. And another data furnisher would be kind of like a public record. That's not, also a creditor. So the terminology that when I use data furnisher, that's why I use that. So, but
interesting. And so the furnishers are responsible for providing the information to the bureaus?
They do. They provide it to the bureaus. Yes, sir.
And what are some of the common errors that people should be on the lookout for when they're preparing to dispute information?
Well, the one thing they could look at is, personal information, because personal information can affect what may happen to the file in the future. So it's important to look at your personal information, your names, addresses, date of birth, something like that. Just look at it, make sure that's correct. And then you can go through the report and look and see, if there's any inaccuracies, like, are there any late payments showing? Are there any balance information, payment information? I would go through and just kind of look at it line by line and try to see if there's anything inaccurate. And if it is, of course, bring it to the attention to the appropriate CRA or data furnisher.
Now, when somebody is preparing to dispute, there's a number of ways they can dispute. Is there a best method?
I know for me, in my opinion, mail is best. And the reason mail is best is because you can track it. If you have a fax number, that's great, but there's that, chance that fax wasn't received, and you just don't know. There might be a communication glitch. You just don't know. But I know with mail, you just need to have some tracking for it. That's the main thing. Be able to track that they got the dispute.
So certified mail is going to be the best bet.
I would highly recommend certified mail. Yes.
Okay. And so once the bureau receives the letter, what happens?
Well, and from my experience, what happens is that you've got personnel that will go to the post office and retrieve the mail, and it's coming in the large white containers, the mail containers that they use that will hold multiple letters. So they get you got to remember they get thousands of letters a day. So they get the mail, they take it back to the company, and then at that time the mail is going to be sorted and scanned. So they're going to go through it. They're going to scan the mail. I'm sorry, they're going to scan it first, and then they're going to sort it because it needs to be sorted to go to the appropriate department. Departments are set up to handle certain types of mail, and agents are trained to handle certain types of mail.
So does anybody actually read the letter before it's scanned?
Maybe the mail personnel will look at it and they can try to determine if batches of mail they wanted to clarify it as being frivolous. So that's one thing that you have to be aware of is that, the CRAs, you have to remember they're a profit company. They're trying to make a, profit. So if they get overwhelmed with mail, they may try to figure out a way, okay, how can we clarify this mail as being frivolous? So they, but, initially they're going to look at it, they're going to, but yeah, it could be, I do know of instances where mail was not scanned, it was declared frivolous and they took no action.
So I don't want to get sidetracked on that, but would a consumer get a notice if it was never scanned and entered into the system? Would they get a response saying that their dispute is frivolous, or would it just be ignored?
I've seen both. I've seen it where there was no notice given because what has happened is, the CRA determined that the mail they believed it was being sent by a third party. It wasn't being sent by the consumer with the consumer's involvement. So they declared it as being frivolous and chose not to take any action.
Okay, so back to the scanned letters they're scanned, and what happens after those letters are received and scanned?
Right. The mail is scanned. It goes into an internet program when it's scanned in, and in that internet program, the agent or the mail person, the sorters, can go through it and look at it and determine, okay, where should this go? Okay, because there's teams set up that are trained to take care of certain types of mail. So if it's just a credit report request, then that would go to this team. If it's a dispute, it would go to this team. So it just depends on what's going on.
Okay, so then let's say our consumer's dispute gets routed to the dispute department.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us more about that?
I sure can. On the dispute teams, it depends on what type of dispute. That's broken down even further. Is that they call it like a regular dispute. That would be anything that does with the ownership or status. Now, or it could be if it's fraud disputes. Well, then that's what they call, not mine fraud. So that would be another one. So another one could be not mine mixed. Mixed files happen, and so it just depends on which team it's going to go to determine who should handle it. The way it works is an agent has to be trained in that area of disputes to handle that type of dispute. So an example would be if they're a fraud agent, they can handle fraud disputes and regular disputes. But if they're not trained in mixed files, they can't dispute anything that's a mixed file.
And is that decision of which department to send it to, that initial evaluation of the dispute, is it done by a person or is it done by a computer, or how does that work?
It's done by the sorter. The sorter, a person does look at it. They look at it and say, okay, where should it go? Something to keep in mind is mail initially picked up by the personnel from the mail department. PO boxes may be routed to certain teams also. So, certain mail that goes to a certain PO box, that gives you kind of an indicator that, so you can go to the CRA's website. It may say, if you're just looking for a report, go to this, write to this PO box. If you're going to do a dispute, write to this PO box. So it just, that's another indicator to help the mail personnel to kind of know how to, categorize the mail.
Okay. So we've got a dispute and it's been sorted and it's in the hands of a dispute agent. What happens at this point?
Well, the dispute agent is supposed to, scan the mail, quickly determine what the disputes are and make a determination of, can it be handled internally, or is this something that needs to be handled externally, meaning ACDV should be sent. So and if it's externally, that means that they need to get the data furnisher involved. And what happens in that process is they send it, they decide what dispute code is going to be used. The basic categories are ownership and status. Then there's some others, but basically you want to look at it from the, are they saying it's not theirs, or are they just saying a part of it is just incorrect? So that's kind of, and then they have to go through the codes and figure out which code to classify the dispute.
Okay, and these dispute folks, are they based in the United States or are they overseas?
They're both. So,
okay, so
each CRA operates a little differently as far as location, but for the most part, they've got personnel in the States that can handle the disputes, and they've also got personnel in other countries.
So it's possible that a non-native English speaker could be reading these disputes and deciding what happens with them.
That is correct.
So about how long does this take from the time that a dispute is received that a dispute agent has made a decision about it?
Well, I know that the standard that, the previous CRA I worked for, the standard was 4 minutes and 30 seconds per consumer. That
Wow.
was kind of right. So it, and the viewpoint on that was you're going to have some disputes that are quick and there's going to have some that are longer. And, the belief is in the end, it'll balance out. Well, the problem with that is that when you're setting a time limit, the agent, is held to a standard, and, their job's on the line based on that standard. So they're in a hurry. They're trying to make sure they get it done quickly. So that's in, from my experience, disputes get missed. They, or they're not, handled properly, or so it happens.
So in our case, so the dispute agent sends the dispute, forwards the dispute or ACDV to the furnisher. Can you tell us about that process?
I can. What happens is that the dispute agent will enter into the computer at their location, that, hey, an ACDVD needs to go to the data furnisher about this account, and here's the dispute reason. And then it's entered into the database. The ACDV is sent electronically to the data furnisher. Okay, now the dispute agent has the ability, and when I say dispute agent, I'm going to make this generic, whether they're handling mixed files, ID theft, or regular disputes, it's basically the same. So they basically, in the automated consumer dispute verification is what the ACDV stands for, but they basically can attach the letter that the consumer sent to the ACDV, so the data furnisher can see exactly what the consumer is talking about.
So a data furnisher, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that the reason this happened was years ago that capability wasn't possible. And, of course, the CFPB came on board probably 2010, 11-ish roughly. Well, in 2013 is when that process started with attaching, the letters to the ACDV, so that way the data furnisher can see exactly what the consumer is talking about.
So a furnisher will receive the ACDV, and then that's a 2-page document that summarizes the account and the status and gives room for correction. And they'll receive a copy of the dispute letter and any attachments.
They can. Now, to keep in mind that the ACDV is not a document, it's actually an electronic message. That when they're using the eOscar system for disputes. And I know this is a lot of different information, but it's eOscar is the dispute system. The Metro 2 is the language, and the ACDV is a message.
Okay.
So the message is the ACDV. It's an electronic message. So they don't get documents per se. They are getting an electronic message.
Okay. And they have software that they interact with that helps them evaluate and change or update their reporting.
That is correct. Yeah.
Now, in my FCRA cases, I've seen these printed out as a 2-page document, the ACDV.
Yes.
That's how it prints out. But inside the system, it's just a series of numbers and letters.
Right. I mean, the main thing, the reason, okay, they had to find a way to print the ACDVs. So that way in, for instance, a litigation case or maybe a subpoena, they have to provide that information. So they had to figure out a way to print those ACDVs for, people to see.
So back to our scenario, the furnisher receives the ACDV, one or more supporting documents, and what happens at that point?
Well, according to the FCRA, they're supposed to investigate the disputes and determine, what the disputes are. They're supposed to investigate on their end. They've got up to 30 days to investigate and respond back to the CRA that sent the ACDV. And then after they investigate, they respond back and tell the CRA basically what should be done with the account.
Okay. And does the Bureau run a parallel investigation to the furnisher's investigation?
Well, the reinvestigation process that the CRAs claim, from what my experience is, they just basically, their reinvestigation is typically review the documents. If they can't update the account based on the dispute, they forward the information to the data furnisher. And that's pretty much the extent of the reinvestigation process for the CRA.
So that 4.5 minute window is the only reinvestigation a bureau will do generally.
Pretty much. That's basically it. There is the capability to, and this is the one thing that's interesting about it, is that when the ACDV comes back from the data furnisher, the majority of the time that I've seen it, it just automatically updates in the database. There's no human contact with that ACDV. There is an ACDV team. They may review it, but most of the time in those instances I've seen them review it, it's rarely that they update it to anything different than what the data furnisher said.
So when that ACDV comes back, it's just generally an electronic updating of the Bureau's records, and then what happens after that?
Well, once the investigation cycle is over with, and what I mean by investigation cycle or dispute cycle, let's say that's probably a better way to say it. Once the dispute cycle, because let's say a consumer disputes 5 accounts, okay? Well, 5 ACDVs go out. Well, those ACDVs may be returned with an answer on different dates. So, but once the dispute cycle has ended, meaning all ACDVs have been returned with responses, then the reinvestigation results, investigation results, dispute results will be sent to the consumer.
And that's after the entire investigation's done, not after each furnisher gets back to the Bureau.
Correct.
Okay. And so then the consumer who disputed the information receives their dispute results with any updated information.
Right. It's either updated, or the account may be deleted, or the account, they may not do anything. They may say, we're reporting it accurately and we're not doing anything else.
Okay. Is that the end of a dispute process there?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Doug, thank you for taking the time to walk us through the dispute process. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you help consumers and other folks out?
Oh, yeah, great. Thank you. I have a business, Credit Experts of North Texas. Okay. And what I do is I am a credit expert witness. I can help attorneys with their court cases and doing an expert report. Uh, but I can also help consumers, with their questions also. So if they're, I do work with other uh, credit repair organizations to try to answer their questions. I do, I am available for consultation. So if, attorneys don't have to just look to me for an expert report, but if there's attorneys out there that want to just, have me as a consultant, I can be hired as a consultant also.
Great. Well, I appreciate taking the time to speak with us today, and I look forward to some future conversations with you. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate you.